Amid Eldenwood Village, two teenagers, Alan and John, found their haven surrounded by huge trees and peaceful streams. Throughout their formative years, they embellished their lives with shared ventures, running through meadows, swimming around the clear streams, and unraveling the mysteries of the night sky, all within the comforting confines of Eldenwood. Yet, as time passed, anxiety stirred within Alan. It was like something was burning within him. Soon, life within the village became dull for him. He would do the same thing every day. Get up, tend to the sheep, say hi to the same villagers every day, talk to John, rinse and repeat. Nothing was new to him anymore. He always wondered what life would be like outside the village, what new adventures he could have, what kind of people could I meet. But he knew it was a fleeting dream, for it was forbidden to leave the village due to legends of a curse that plagues the forest that surrounds them. Meanwhile, John felt content within the village. He had no issue with the daily routine. The warm smiles of neighbors always gave him a sense of peace. Even though the village was surrounded by a wall of trees, he still felt safe. It was like an unwavering shield against predators that can strike before they are seen. One morning, as the sun descended, it cast an amber veil over the village. Alan and John settled on the grassy hill. Alan looked over at John and said,
"Have you ever asked yourself what life is like beyond the village, John? Don't you get bored of doing the same thing every day?"
His voice held both a hunger for knowledge and the weight of unspoken doubts. John's brow furrowed slightly, understanding in his gaze as he looked at the village below. The distant laughter of children and the soft babbling of the stream formed a fragile backdrop.
The thought never crossed my mind. How could it when we live in such a peaceful place?
John's voice was tinged with a touch of skepticism. His fingers traced the grass's grooves, seeking refuge in its tangible familiarity.
Why would I want to venture away from the village? We'll only find trouble or most likely death.
Alan's eyes remained locked on the horizon, a desolate junction where the sky melded into the oppressive grasp of the dense forest.
They say ignorance is bliss, but it's if we forget that knowledge wields power.
He shifted uneasily, the touch of the cool earth against his palms, grounding him in his discontent.
I'm tired of this, man. Don't you have dreams other than herding sheep for the rest of your life? I actually want to experience life, John.
Concerned and frustrated, John blended in his eyes as he peered at his friend. He turned his gaze towards the looming forest, its shadows expanding in tandem with the fading light.
You're being foolish, Alan. Willing to take your life on mere curiosity? Seriously? You'd cast aside everything, everyone in this village, just for a fleeting thrill? You know the legends.
Alan abruptly cuts John off, using his hands to parrot John.
Yeah. For those who enter the forest get turned into a beast. You can't seriously believe that.
John visibly becomes annoyed by Alan's mockery. With that, John stumbles away to bed, his face still red with anger. Alan felt a bit guilty, but he still wanted answers. He couldn't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction and wanted to know the truth. He tried to go to sleep that night, but the feeling just kept gnawing at him. He became restless. Alan still felt guilty for making John upset. He loved his village, and he loved his best friend. But it just wasn't enough. The next morning, Alan's frustration boiled over as he watched a herd of sheep with John.
I'm tired of this place. It's boring, and all we do is herd sheep all day and farm. It's ironic how we are herding sheep, but we are sheep ourselves.
John sighed, his expression pained.
You're not bringing this up again, Alan. We've already had this talk yesterday, and it's quite exhausting. Know your place. This is your home. Nowhere else will be this forgiving.
Alan's eyes blazed with determination.
There has to be more to life than this. And if this is all we are doing, then can we call it living? What's the difference between a rock that stays in the same place and us?
John says.
The rock is dead.
Alan puffs out his cheeks in frustration and abruptly stands up.
Forget you, John. You can be nothing more than a dead rock if you want. I'm going to live my life the way I know best.
Alan went to go speak to the village elders and begged him to explore the forest. But the village elders told him many times of the dangers that lurked in the forest, and they told him that the curse was dangerous and would turn anyone who comes in contact with it into a beast, and anyone who would come in contact with the beast would turn into a beast themselves. Alan asks if that's true, then how come no one has done anything about it? But they gave Alan no response. Alan grew tired of hearing the same stories over and over again. The elders' refusal to do anything really irritated him. As Alan left the conversation, a spark of rebellion ignited within him. He couldn't accept being confined any longer. That night, he planned to sneak out of the village and see what was out there for himself. He knew the risk he would take if he did this, but he didn't care. He was creating his own destiny. The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a silvery glow over Eldenwood Village. Alan moved stealthily through the village, every step deliberate and quiet. As he approached the village's edge, his heart pounded with excitement. He was determined to breach the forest boundaries and unveil the truth. But just as he reached the outskirts, a voice cut through the darkness.
Alan, wait!
Startled, Alan turned to see John emerging from the shadows, his eyes wide with concern.
What are you doing, Alan? You can't seriously be thinking of going into the forest.
Alan hesitated, caught off guard by John's unexpected presence.
I need to know what's out there. I can't stay confined here forever.
John's voice was earnest, tinged with anxiety.
Alan, this is stupid. Come on, let's go back home.
Alan's resolve wavered momentarily, but the stubborn fire in his eyes remained.
I want to see the truth with my own eyes, John.
John's gaze pleaded with him.
Please reconsider.
With a heavy heart, Alan ignores John and walks off into the forest.
Alan, wait!
They felt an eerie sensation as they stepped beyond the village's safety. The air grew more relaxed. Alan walked with an air of confidence, occasionally looking back to offer John a mocking grin.
See, John? No monsters, no curses, it's just a forest.
Alan taunted, but John still felt uneasy, his eyes darting nervously around their surroundings.
We should head back now. There's nothing here.
Alan turns around at John and reassures him that everything is fine. As they ventured deeper into the forest, a rustling sound echoed through the woods. Alan's bravado faltered, and he exchanged a worried glance with John. The noise grew more insistent, and panic began to set in. Without a word, they ran, their footsteps echoing through the forest. Every snap of a twig sent shivers down their spine. The forest had transformed into a realm of dread. In their haste, Alan stumbled over a tangle of brush and fell to the ground onto a bed of mysterious plants. He winced as he felt a sharp pain in his palm. John rushed to his side, concern etched on his face.
Are you okay, Alan?
Alan tried to force a smile, attempting to alleviate the tension.
I'm fine. Just a little stumble. See? No harm done.
But as John's eyes met his, Alan saw a look of terror he had never witnessed before. John slowly started to walk back away from Alan. Alan's voice grew worried.
John, What's wrong?
Confused, Alan looked down at his hands, his heart skipping a beat. The skin was shifting, taking on a deep green hue, and his nails were growing sharp and pointed. His breath caught in his throat as he looked up at John, his voice trembling.
What's happening to me?
John took another step back, his voice a mixture of fear and disbelief.
Alan, your hair.
Confused and frightened, Alan reached up to touch his hair, and his fingertips brushed against strands of vivid green. His heart raced as he looked into a nearby puddle, his reflection revealing a face that was no longer his own. His hair was green, his eyes had turned a piercing yellow, and fangs protruded from his mouth. He stared in horror at the monstrous visage before him, his screams of terror echoing through the once silent forest. Alan's world shattered as his reflection stared back at him, a monstrous and grotesque form that bore no resemblance to his former self. Panic gripped his heart, and the jokes and boldness that had defined him vanished. John stares in disbelief, and his voice trembles.
What happened to you?
Alan turned to John, his eyes wide with desperation, and reached out toward him. Alan pleaded, his voice trembling.
John, help me, please!
But John stepped back, fear etched across his face.
Don't touch me.
Alan's outstretched hands fell to his sides, his heart sinking as he realized the distance that had suddenly grown between them. He fell to his knees, his world crumbling around him. Despair washed over him. He buried his face in his hands, his sobs echoing through the night. Seeing his friend in such anguish tore at John's heart. He hesitated, torn between fear and compassion.
Maybe we should go back to the village and tell the village elders.
Alan's tear-stained eyes met John's, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness.
You really think they'll let me in looking like this?
John's voice was firm, determined to stand by his friend.
They have to. We're like family at the end of the day, and family sticks together.
Together, they ran back through the forest, with Alan keeping careful distance away from John, their steps fueled by desperation and a sliver of hope. But as they approached the village gates, the scene that unfolded was more chilling than they could have imagined. The villagers had gathered, their faces twisted in fear and anger. They pointed accusing fingers at Alan, their voices raised full of accusations. Monster! Cursebringer! Alan tried to plead his case, to explain that he was still the same person inside, but their words were drowned out by the villagers' cries, and they were met with hostile glares. Enough! Someone shouted, their voice ringing above the turmoil. It was the village elders. They gazed at Alan with a mixture of sadness and regret. They looked at Alan with disappointment and dread. With a heavy heart, they told him that he brought this upon himself. With those words, Alan was casted out of the village. The villagers' gazes were a blend of fear and remorse. They had condemned him, deemed him a monster. Alone and heartbroken, Alan stumbled away from the village, the weight of his isolation pressing down on him. He found solace beneath a tree, his sobs echoing through the night. His once bold spirit, now shattered. Meanwhile, John watched the scene unfold from within the village, his heart aching for his friend. He was appalled by how the village treated him. Despite his appearance, that was still Alan at the end of the day. John thought back to what Alan said, that maybe there was more to them being confined within the village. John slipped back into the shadows as the moon reached its peak. He escaped back into the forest, finding Alan huddled beneath the tree. Alan looked up, his tear-stained eyes meeting John's. A mix of surprise and sadness in his gaze.
John, are you crazy? You were right, okay? I should have never left.
John knelt beside his friend, his voice steady and resolute.
Maybe we were both wrong, or maybe we were both right. Who cares? All I know is that family sticks together.
Tears welled up in Alan's eyes as John pulled him into a tight embrace. But as their bodies touched, a strange sensation swept through John, and a chill ran down his spine. Alan pulled away, his eyes wide with realization.
What did you do?
John looked at his hands, the green hue spreading over his skin. He smiled weakly at Alan, his voice filled with sorrow and determination.
Looks like we're in this together.
As the curse took hold of John, their bodies transformed, their appearances mirroring one another. Alan cracked a weak joke, a bittersweet smile on his lips, tears mingling with the laughter. And so, as the first rays of dawn peeked through the trees, the two friends sat side by side, their new forms stark against the backdrop of the awakening forest. The creatures of the wood approached cautiously, their eyes filled with curiosity rather than fear.